Well, ladies and gentlemen, I must be honest that over the weekend I read the news and I just thought to myself, you know what, the news is just so retarded, I just had to take Monday off. I just couldn't face a video because, to be frank, the news was just like, I just couldn't believe some of the things that I read. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I really would appreciate that if you could. Anyway, let's get straight on to the news. And so the first news article is actually around AGOA. Yeah, I know what you're saying. AGOA is dead, so was there anything to discuss? Well, Ramaphosa gave a reassurance at the weekend. He said that despite a bruising relationship with Washington, he insisted that the US-South Africa commercial ties are resilient. He highlighted over 600 US companies which operate in South Africa, spanning mining, tech, healthcare, finance, and advanced manufacturing. Now, Trump's tariffs that came in August, the 30% tariffs, have crippled industries such as the automotive, agriculture, and steel. As you know, the whole reason for the tariffs are what Trump referred to as the claims of white genocide in South Africa, and he positioned those tariffs as punishment for South Africa's foreign policy. But businesses warn of disrupted supply chains and investor flight and job losses if the tariffs continue. So, what's happened? Well, apparently there's been a AGOA extension hopes. Now, I don't really know how hopeful the extension is, but let's talk about it. So apparently, as you know, AGOA has been in place for 25 years, and the purpose of it is to give African countries duty-free access to the US market. Now, it expires in the next few days, and insiders in Washington now hint at a last-minute 1 to 2 years extension. Now, Trump's Africa advisor has said that the White House agrees with AGOA's objectives and suggests some compromises are possible. And so what this could mean is that, well, AGOA could just be extended for 1 to 2 years. Now, I must highlight that this push to get AGOA extended, it seems like it's coming from other African countries, and South Africa itself seems to think that it may benefit from the extension of AGOA. But in other news, I've also read that South Africa may be excluded from that renewal, but the news around this is kind of flaky, so I'm not really 100% sure. In any case, AGOA exports account for 46% of South Africa's total exports to the US, and is worth around 71.5 billion rand annually. Now, the Reserve Bank estimates that if South Africa loses AGOA, at least 100,000 jobs would vanish, devastating industries like the auto assembly, citrus, nuts, and wine industries. And as part of the regional fallout, even Lesotho's apparel industry would collapse. Now, in order to get AGOA renewed, there are some concessions being offered by Pretoria, who have proposed allowing more US poultry and pork imports to South Africa, pledging to buy US liquefied natural gas, and clarifying tax rules on digital products like software. The US wants its companies exempted from BEE rules, which Pretoria has so far resisted, but Ramaphosa frames AGOA as not just about South Africa, but also about Africa's place in global trade. He's pushing for the African Continental Free Trade Area as a partner to US business. Now, that in itself is kind of interesting because he's saying that the African Continental Free Trade Area is almost like an African Union, and that union could partner with the US direct. Kind of not how the free trade area works, but I suppose what he's effectively trying to say is that it's like the prelude to a EU scenario. Now, US chambers of commerce back an AGOA renewal and argue that it also helps American companies relying on African imports. So far, there looks like there's a bit of willingness from the US and a bit of willingness from the parts of South Africa. So will it actually be renewed? Don't know, but I'll let you know as these things advance. So what else occurred at the weekend? Now, it's been important for me to tell you about AGOA first, because then I'm going to talk to you about the pro-Palestinian pressure and the foreign policy fallout as a result of this from the Cape Town weekend marches. Now, there were two separate pro-Palestinian rallies which drew thousands into the streets on the weekend in Cape Town. Now, the organizers included, well, many Muslim groups, and so it should come as no surprise that they were rioting to a degree for Palestine. In any case, this included the Al-Quds Foundation, the Muslim Judicial Council, and the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. Now, what's really important to understand is that the ANC's Deputy Secretary General declared, well, she went to those marches, and so she had to make herself popular by making a speech. But in any case, her speech, she declared, let those sanctions come. So what she effectively said is that the US may sanction South Africa for the position that it takes on Israel. And she said she don't care. She said, sanction the crap out of South Africa. She doesn't care. South Africa will take it. It's been sanctioned before. These ANC leaders, they don't care. Sanction away, baby. And she urged boycotts of Israeli goods and, well, like I said, urged the US to sanction South Africa. She actually said the US must sanction South Africa. That's what these ANC people think, because many of them have zero understanding of what the actual economic fallouts to their positions are. Now, she tied solidarity with Gaza directly to South Africa's own liberation history. She said that Nelson Mandela once said that South Africa's struggle for freedom will never be achieved, while the Palestinian issue of freedom is never achieved. So yeah, apparently the ANC is now saying South Africa is not free because Palestine's not free. I don't know. I can't make sense of it either. In any case, in terms of the ICJ case, South Africa's genocide case against Israel at The Hague continues, and now it continues with the support of Brazil, Spain, Turkey, and Ireland, all backing South Africa's legal push. As you know, the US has opposed it, which has deepened the diplomatic strain between South Africa and the US. Now, civil society, many of these Muslim-type pro-Palestinian groups, are all urging stronger action in South Africa, and they all say that South Africa must close the Israeli embassy and end all trade links to Israel and sanction local companies seen as complicit or being involved with Israel. Yeah, that's swell. Now do Russia. Yeah, let's do Russia. Anyway, the Anglican Church, you may recall who they are. I mean, you may have read about them in history books because that's pretty much the only place you'll hear about them anymore. You remember they were the church that came here from England. Yeah, I mean, now in the UK, they suggest that you should worship Allah or something. The true story, look it up. Anyway, they issued a statement condemning the genocidal actions in Gaza and demanding sanctions on, Israel. Now, a reverend at the church looked to really turn the other cheek and forgive those he feels are trespassing against him by suggesting that Zionism should be equated to apartheid. Yes, so now if you have any form of Zionism that you want a Jewish homeland for yourself, yeah, that's apartheid. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really look at the Anglican Church as having a moral grandstanding position, to be frank. Now, you know what's really interesting? Well, Bill Maher, because Bill Maher at the weekend talked about this whole Palestinian issue and says we keep going on about the genocide that's going on in Palestine. And he said, I've got to ask you a question. Bill Maher did. He said that there's a silence around the Islamist massacre of Nigerian Christians. He says that 100,000 have been killed since 2009, 18,000 churches have been burned down. Zero outrage. Nobody's talking about it. In fact, what he noted is that despite large-scale amounts of Christians being killed in Nigeria, the Western media just don't care about it. It's just not important. Now, with 68,000 suggested deaths in Gaza, apparently that's far more important to discuss. But the actual genocide occurring in Nigeria, nope, not important.
You love the world and you want to see a better world. Your interest is not just free Palestine. I mean, there are more people dying in Nigeria than are dying in Palestine. I can tell you that last year alone, over 500,000 Christians were killed in Nigeria just in 1 year. And nobody's protesting. The activists are not saying anything. For me, that's hypocrisy. In the north of Nigeria, Christians are being killed daily because the Islamic militants don't want Christians to exist in the north of Nigeria. They want to see a world where there are no Christians at all. And they want to conquer not just Nigeria, they want to conquer Africa, they want to conquer Europe, and they want to conquer America. The younger generation who want to live in a better world must speak out today.
Now, the reason that that's important is because the actual genocide in Nigeria cannot be helped. These are instances where radical Islamists are going into communities and slaughtering individuals for nothing more than their race and their religion. But you see, the so-called mythological genocide in Gaza could literally be ended overnight by releasing the hostages. Like, that's all you've got to do, and they'll leave. They'll leave you alone. And this was actually noted by the German Chancellor, who himself said, what's happening in Gaza is not a genocide. Hamas could end the war in hours by releasing the hostages. And this is 100% correct.
¿Por qué España habla de genocidio en Gaza y Alemania no?
Wir sehen vor allem das unermessliche Leid der Zivilbevölkerung im Gazastreifen. Wir teilen die Einschätzung, dass dies unverhältnismäßig ist im Hinblick auf die zu Recht von der israelischen Regierung erwarteten Ziele. Und ich will es noch einmal sagen, dieser Krieg endet sofort, wenn die Hamas die Geiseln freilässt und die Waffen schweigen lässt. Die Hamas hat es in der Hand, innerhalb von Stunden diesen Konflikt zu beenden. Trotzdem sehen wir die eingesetzten Mittel als kritisch an. Wir teilen die Einschätzung der israelischen Regierung nicht, dass sie auf diesem Weg das Ziel erreichen kann, nämlich die Hamas auf Dauer zu beseitigen. Insofern teilen wir die Kritik im Vorgehen. Wir teilen nicht miteinander die Beschreibung dieses Vorgehens als einen Völkermord. Wir bemühen uns gemeinsam in der Europäischen Union und jedes Mitgliedsland in der Europäischen Union einzuwirken auf die israelische Regierung. Und Sie wissen vermutlich, dass ich bereits vor 5 Wochen die Entscheidung getroffen habe, dass aus der Bundesrepublik Deutschland Waffen und Munition, die in diesem Teil des Konfliktes eingesetzt werden können, nicht mehr geliefert werden.
So you see, when you have no control over your survival in places like Nigeria, not a genocide. When you have 100% control over your survival by doing nothing more than just releasing the hostages that you yourself took, genocide. Yeah, okay, I see how this works. And so Bill Maher's 100% correct. We all seem to doing this moral grandstanding. We all talk how wonderful we are and look how we're supporting the whole Palestinian issue. We encourage sanctions onto countries like South Africa, where we desperately need jobs. But at the end of the day, in an actual African country, remember that South Africa pretends that it's really interested in African unity. So Nigerian Christians, yeah, who cares about them? They're not important to talk about. I mean, it's Nigeria, right? Yeah, I mean, this is the world we live in. It's just like topsy-turvy all over the show. Now, talking of topsy-turvy, let's turn our attention through to the GNU, because there has been a degree of GNU paralysis, with the DA, Freedom Front Plus, Good and Razan Zanzi complaining that Cyril Ramaphosa himself hasn't met any of the coalition leaders in 143 days. They say that the cabinet effectively runs on autopilot, with parties working in silos, with many disputes all festering unresolved. Now, the promised GNU's dispute resolution forum has never happened, and GNU leaders say they can't even get a 20-minute meeting with Ramaphosa. Apparently, the DA can't replace a dismissed deputy minister that's in finance because the president won't engage the DA. The Freedom Front Plus wars, the GNU risks falling apart. And then we have the whole Kenny Kunene and Gates McKenzie showdown, with the Patriotic Alliance threatening to collapse the GNU if Kenny Kunene isn't reinstated as Joburg's transport MEC. The EFF simultaneously has threatened to pull out of all co-governed municipality if the ANC gives in to the PA. And Ramaphosa supposedly has stepped in and forced ANC leaders to restore Kenny Kunene to calm investors and prevent municipal collapse. But the question really is, well, where is Cyril Ramaphosa in all this? Apparently, he should be there guiding the GNU, running the country. Well, according to, pretty much everybody in the GNU, he's not there. He's noticeably absent. The country is being run basically without a leader. We're leaderless. Now, ultimately, this has all led to many analysts suggesting that Ramaphosa himself is actually unsuited for crisis leadership. As you know, he seeks endless consensus inside the ANC's NEC, which ultimately means that he's trying to get consensus from a bunch of corrupt, ideological, and incompetent figures, which, as you know, is just going to make any form of decision nigh on impossible. And so Cyril Ramaphosa is now at the point where he just doesn't even try. He doesn't care. Now, Frans Cronje actually debunks Cyril Ramaphosa's reputation as a great trade union leader, negotiator, and industrialist, and he argued that Anglo-America drove mining reforms, Mandela was the true Kazesa negotiator, and Ramaphosa's wealth largely came from empowerment deals and not from entrepreneurship. So, as you can see, many coalition partners are echoing these concerns. They say Ramaphosa avoids hard decisions, runs governments in silos. And so, as you can see, they're all suggesting that this is leaving the coalition management adrift, with basically zero end goal in mind. This means that basically the government's just on autopilot, like nothing is working the way that it should. And this has led Rise Mzansi to say that there isn't actually a single signed GNU agreement, but only fragmented ANC party deals with a receipt for chaos. Because ultimately, that's exactly what we're seeing in South Africa at the moment. All of the policy decisions are, well, they're non-existent, which is why we're in the mess that we are. Now, talking of empowerment deals, at the weekend, I had to read this article and I just laughed my freaking head off. Because, as you know, the Department of Labour issued their new employment equity sectoral targets, which they have mandated across the 18 industries. And as you also know, the BUSA took the government to court, calling them rushed and unrealistic and harmful. Now, the Black Management Forum, the Black Management Forum, they hit back saying, transformation is decades overdue. So apparently we haven't been transforming for the last 30 years. Apparently it's now overdue. And they say that Stats SA shows that 80% of South Africa's population is black, yet only 16 or nearly 17% of top management jobs are held by black Africans. They say that unemployment is 36% for black South Africans versus 9% for whites. Now that means that the Black Management Forum has suggested that these targets must be lawful, rational, and necessary, and they are aligned with global anti-discrimination standards, which I must be honest and say, no, they don't. You're talking complete nonsense. But you see, this is the problem. You will not get turkeys voting for Christmas, no matter how much you try. The Black Management Forum is never going to say that South Africa is ever transformed enough. It can be 100% transformed, and it'll still be decades overdue. It's just the way these morons think. Talking of a moron, let's go on to the final news article of the day, and that is the news article of Rasool, who at the weekend delivered a speech at Nelson Mandela Bay University. Yep, I don't know why he was in my side of the woods, but apparently he was. In any case, at that address, he described Trump's diplomacy as purely transactional, and he said that Trump discarded values. He warned South Africa has too many eggs in the US basket, so should look to diversify and go elsewhere. And he said that South Africa risks sacrificing its moral authority for trade deals. I'm sorry, buddy, but I don't know what moral authority you're talking about. We literally have one of the most corrupt governments in history, with all the state departments being the worst ranked in the world. And you're sitting there talking about moral authority. You are the problem, I'm afraid. In any case, he lamented South Africa's loss of political identity since the corruption era, which no doubt you were involved in, according to allegations made in the mainstream legacy media. That's just an allegation they make. I'm just repeating it. I mean, I don't know if you're corrupt or not. You let us know. But you see, what's really interesting is that he had some very disparaging comments about Trump itself. He said that, Trump was all the usual things. He's a tyrant, he's a repressive, he's blah, blah, blah. And I got to say, this is why the guy got kicked out of the US. They said they don't want to work with him. Because you can't go into the US and start talking about how terrible they are and then ask them for a trade deal. Why are these people so retarded? And then when you get Harding for sitting there talking smack about the nation that you're meant to be creating an agreement with and who are hosting you, you then cry foul and say, oh, must be racist or something. These people have no shame, but they also have no brains. They are purely retarded. Any case, these are just my views. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.